Greetings and welcome to another lecture in Introductory Psychology. This one involves Humanistic Theory. Now remember, the humanists thought that the most important thing to study was humans in terms of psychology. It was formed as sort of a rebuttal to psychoanalysis and to behaviorism, both of which assumed that we are simply puppets on a string controlled by either our environment or our unconscious, depending on which one you're talking about. Now, the humanists believed that we had free will, that we could decide what we wanted to do, and also that we were always trying to become the best person we could be. Now, a big proponent of humanistic psychology was Carl Rogers, and he came up with a personality theory more or less based on these ideas of humanism. Now, he called his theory the self theory, S-E-L-F, self theory. Now, Rogers believed that we had three selves. The first was the ideal self. This is the person that we want to be. Remember, humanists believe that we're always trying to become the best person. The ideal self is who we are trying to be. Our self-image is who we think we are. And our true self is who we actually are. Note that those two don't necessarily overlap. It is indeed possible to have ideas about yourself that are pretty much entirely wrong. We do this all the time. We think we are this way or that way, when an outside observer would say, well, actually, no, you're not. Rogers believed that what we are all working toward, and that unfortunately not many of us actually achieve, is what he called congruence, which is when our ideal self, our self-image, and our true self all overlap. You can see it on this diagram, where basically all of these are overlapping. We are who we want to be, and we know ourselves. Unfortunately, most of us are over there on the left. We're incongruent. And so therefore, we need to work on things, either with ourselves or with a therapist to help us along. Now, the incongruence can be caused by any of a number of things. I'm going to talk about what Rogers believed the real biggie was in just a second. Now, as I said, this is a self theory, and Rogers believed that when we achieve congruence, we will be what is called a fully functioning person. This means, as I said, that all of ourselves line up. We're the best person we can be, and we know it. We know who we actually are, and that's what we're all striving to become, but unfortunately, many of us fail. Most of us probably do. And the reason that many of us fail is because we're lacking something very important when becoming a fully functioning person, and that is positive self-regard. Rogers believed that positive self-regard was, it's basically what it means is that you like yourself. You like yourself, you love yourself, that sort of thing. Now, before you say to yourself, well, doesn't everybody like and love themselves? Think about it. I know lots of people who don't particularly like themselves, and much less love themselves. They may think that they're not as good as everyone else. They may think there's something really wrong with them. A lot of us do not have positive self-regard, and Rogers believed that that's a real problem. Now, what Rogers believed that we needed to do in order to develop positive self-regard, in the grand tradition of psychology, he believed that if you didn't have that, that it was your parents' fault. And in fact, that people do not have positive self-regard because they are lacking in what was called unconditional positive regard from their parents. Now, unconditional positive regard is a concept that we're seeing a lot of these days, but unfortunately it has a tendency to be misused. Unconditional positive regard means that a parent will love their child no matter what damn fool stupid thing the child does. The idea is that the parent can separate the child's behavior from who the child actually is. And so therefore the child knows that no matter what, their parents will still love them. That's unconditional positive regard. Now, children who don't get unconditional positive regard, for instance, may think that if they do something wrong, that their parents won't love them anymore. That their parents will only love them if they do everything perfectly, if they behave properly and get all A's and whatnot, because they've seen, or they think they've seen, their parents withdraw their love when they haven't behaved properly. Interestingly enough, there's been some recent research about this in terms of a rather popular type of punishment these days called the timeout. Now, the timeout is a form of negative punishment where you're taking away good things, which of course makes the person feel bad. And the idea was positive punishment, spanking and yelling and such, was too harsh. You spank, you yell, you make the child feel bad. So instead of spanking and yelling, what you do is you make the child sit and remove them from all the fun stuff for a while. And then for a certain period of time, it's usually 1 minute per year of age. And then you talk to the child and make sure they knew what they did wrong. And then you give them a hug and everybody's happy. The problem is we're seeing some results. When children who are given timeouts have grown to adulthood, we're seeing some results that suggest that children given timeouts begin to believe that if they behave improperly, their parents will withdraw their love. Because when they're put in the timeout, the parent won't look at them, the parent won't talk to them, the parent won't hug them, the parent won't give them anything until they sit there for a certain amount of time. And then in some ways until they admit that they did something that was wrong. And so these children are thinking, well, if I behave improperly, then my parents are going to withdraw love and affection from me, and therefore they're not getting unconditional positive regard, and therefore Rogers would say that they're going to be screwed up. Now, the thing is, though, you don't want to go all the way in the other direction. Unconditional positive regard does not mean that you never punish the child, that you never say no to the child. And the big thing these days, it doesn't mean that every child is necessarily a winner. Children can lose and not be warped for life. They know that. Okay? And so these days, when everybody who goes to a sporting thing gets a ribbon or gets a trophy, kids know when they deserve a reward or a trophy. They know when they're winners, and they know when they're not winners. Kids aren't stupid. And when you give a child a reward, an award, when they're a loser, in some ways that seems to be even worse for the kids, because you have some kids who think, yay, anytime I do anything, I'm going to get what I want. I see that in some of my students who are like, well, I showed up every day, I should pass the class. And I have to say, well, no, you also have to pass the tests and do the work. Simply showing up is not enough. Well, when they showed up at soccer class, they got a ribbon. Okay? Or you see the other thing where you wind up with kids who, like I said, are just terrified that the kids that are never, ever punished and they're praised for everything they do, they are also not very well adjusted. And I got to tell you, teachers hate these kids. They hate them. It's not too sharp a word. They don't hate the kids, they hate the kids' behavior. And that's kind of the point here. I'll get to that again in a second. But when parents are the first person to basically let a child know that what they did wasn't good enough, that they need to do better if they want to get a good grade or if they want to pass, these kids have a tendency to freak out, because up until now, everything has been fine. Now, the idea of unconditional positive regard when done properly is not to praise everything your child does, because sometimes your child does things that are not worthy of praise. The idea is to separate the child's behavior from the child. It's a sort of hate the sin, love the sinner kind of way of looking at it. So when a child does something bad, you don't say to the child, well, you're stupid, or everything you do is bad, or that sort of thing. You say, look, I love you, but that was a damn fool stupid thing you just did. And you really need to not do it again because of this and this. But do realize that this has not, I still love you. Which sounds really awkward. There are ways of putting it non-verbally. But the idea here is to let the child know that no matter what they do, that you are still going to love them. And Rogers believed that that would be the best way for us to get positive self-regard and eventually, hopefully, to become fully functioning people, to become totally congruent.